Jumping on this bandwagon here, I wanted to put my 2 cents into the whole 5 versus 5, 6 versus 6 debate. Personally, at this point in time, I think that I prefer 6v6 over 5v5 as a support player for a multitude of reasons, though my biggest reason I would say is probably the aspect of receiving more peel, though I say that there are other things such as I think it may help with the amount of steamroll games that happen due to snowballing. I feel like 5v5 came to be because the developers could not figure out how to fix the issues with the game that were relevant in the 6v6 format, so rather than trying to balance the game and fix the mistakes that were made, it felt like they took the easier way out by removing 2 players from each team. However, rather than just complaining about why 5v5 is bad and saying why 6v6 is good, I want to look at the official reasons they gave as to why they were swapping the game from 12 players to 10 and see if these changes actually help to resolve those reasons mentioned. I'm going to take these from 2 places. The first is the patch notes from the beta in 2022, and the second is the developer PvP livestream from May of 2021. Now I'm thinking this is more of a result of 5v5 rather than a reason for switching, but I do agree with it. Individual player contribution did affect the team a lot more than 6v6, however it not only affected the success of the team, but also the failure of the team. It was a two-way street. This has resulted in more one-sided games when a player may not be playing at their full potential, where 6v6 helped to make up the lack of a player not contributing as much as the rest of the team. This isn't to say that there weren't throwers that made the game harder during 6v6, but it wasn't nearly as bad because 1 out of 6 players is like 16% of the team and 1 out of 5 is 20%. While that's only like a 4% difference, it put more emphasis on the players to perform. I would agree with this as well. Players were given more space to run out on flanks due to the lack of an off-tank securing an off angle. This would have been a benefit for DPS players had supports not been buffed at the same time to deal with the lack of a second tank to protect them. That being said, I don't believe the lack of a second tank really created that much more space, as space obligations really started to fall to other roles which helped to maintain the space in a lot of maps. This is kind of a moot point. The game still has a lot of visual effects that take up the battlefield. Removing 2 players did not really help in that regard. The natural design of Overwatch heroes and their abilities naturally causes a plethora of visual effects. I would even argue that most of the tank roster had alts that didn't really affect the visuals of the game all that much compared to DPS or support alts. I also don't think the sounds in the game were an issue. I feel like most players in a casual sense are really only taking in visual cues, and the ones that are focusing on sounds more did not really have an issue with a couple of extra sounds from 2 players. I feel like this is true for the damage roll, but I feel like it did not really increase the clarity for support heroes, as we are now taking more of an aggressive stance, doing more damage more often, which wasn't inherently apparent when the game was released, but had to develop over time. I feel like tanks had to completely relearn the game because of the lack of a second tank, so no, I don't think that really helped them either. One of the things that Aaron explains is having 2 main tanks on the battlefield being an issue for the team to deal with. While this is true in a sense, there were not that many times from what I remember that 2 main tanks actually caused that much of a problem for your team or the enemy team. Possibly the biggest issue with 2 tanks was double shield, but tanks like Orisa were reworked to have no shield. I'm in Masters, but seldom did I see 2 main tanks together, and when they were, they did not really work as well as already standardized tank duos like Winston D.Va, Orisa Sigma, Ryan Zarya, etc., because their kits did not synergize. However, I will admit that I do not know what this looked like for players in gold. It may have been different. I completely agree with this. Old Overwatch was very ultimate dependent to wipe teams. If there was an intent to lower ultimate emphasis and add more of an emphasis on players' individual mechanical skill, having an extra person would make this more difficult as you no longer have ultimates as fast, therefore making the game last longer. I think 5v5 did work during the Overwatch 2 beta, but maybe it was the short time to play or the new coat of paint. I remember a lot of players had a real fun time during that period, and players did not have as much fun when the game launched in October, and the issue has just grown since then. At the end of the day, I may not agree with the choices that were made or the reasons given, but I do understand how difficult it must be for a game like this to be balanced. I feel like if we kept 5v5 and nerf supports, we end up with tanks that fall over. If we buff the tanks, they become unkillable again. If we nerf supports but go back to 6v6 with an extra tank, that helps, but are we ready to go back to having 2 tanks on the enemy team? Are we ready for what this may result in? Because even if the balance team isn't great, certainly it's easier to balance and release new heroes in a 5v5 setting than a 6v6 setting, because you have to worry about less overall interactions happening in the game. If you like this video, consider subscribing, leaving a like, and your thoughts down below, and thanks for watching.